we could. So the EAC name for kelp is duh. And, you know, that's what it says it all. The native people want to grow kelp for 3 reasons, and in this order. 1, for restorative purposes of the ocean and mitigation, especially in the spill zone, where you still have a lot of lingering oil. Number 2 is that they want to grow a traditional food source like kelp and bivalves that they've had thousands of years of experience with. And number 3, it'll help tribes build a regenerative economy and build for resiliency during these climate changing times. And we do understand and know that, you know, there's a lot of tribes that are not going to want to grow kelp because, you know, they, or market kelp because, you know, they like to be able to subsist for it in the wild. But the wild kelp forests are starting to die across the planet because of ocean acidification and ocean warming. And what a lot of people don't realize is there's about 350 critters that make a living in that wild kelp forest. And so we feel that if we can help restore those wild kelp forests, or even by growing kelp in farms, that it'll give enormous habitat for critters that are impacted. And the other thing is that kelp can sequester carbon 5 to 20 times more than living terrestrial forests.
Yeah, when we were first introduced to kelp, it felt like the answer to all our hopes. So yeah, it's a traditional resource utilized by Indigenous peoples for a millennia and still to this day. It's a vital species for ocean health and recovery, a foundation species for entire ecosystems. And now it's becoming an emerging dynamic economic industry. So it can be used in food, bioplastics, fertilizer, pharmaceuticals, and a whole lot more. And so when we first got into the kelp world 2 years ago, a year and a half to 2 years ago, we had so much excitement that yes, this was the future, this was the answer. And almost immediately we encountered numerous barriers to even enter the industry, let alone succeed in it. So we developed this model or this approach of first proving that we can grow kelp, proving that we can do it sustainably, that we can do it well, and that we can, when we speak to growing kelp, we can speak to a place of experience. And we've done that. In the last year and a half, we have made huge strides to advancing this agenda. So we've been tackling each barrier one by one, all with the aim to ensure equitable access and sustainability to be placed at the forefront of this emerging industry. And now we are moving into building Indigenous collective power. We want to develop a collaborative space to share lessons learned and best practices. We want to build buying power and market access. And we want to make sure that Native-owned businesses are centered throughout the supply chain. And next, we will aim to position our network and communities to lead restoration and long-term sustainable economic initiatives.
Yeah, and when we started this, you know, I like the thought of getting paid to watch kelp grow, and you know, and because it grows 18 to 24 inches a day, and it's the fastest growing organism on the planet. So I figured, like, how hard can this be? Well, what we realized was there's about a dozen barriers to entry that I can tell you right now. There's some Indigenous individuals and tribes that are not going to be able to overcome all of these obstacles and these barriers if they don't work together. And so, as Tesia was saying, you know, we wanted to create this collective power and share this Indigenous knowledge because of the thousands years of history with kelp and mariculture. So we looked at everything from, you know, how do we, you know, start growing the seed? How do we source it and harvest it and then cultivate it and deploy it? And thank God we have Tesia, because we did everything we possibly could to kill that kelp before we got it in the water. And then she was able to successfully grow all 3 species in 1 year, the first to do that in Alaska. And then we realized that once the kelp grew, then, what do we do with it? How do we harvest it? And how do we value add it? And then how do we, access the markets? And so it's everything from figured out how to process the kelp after you harvest it. How are you going to value add it? How are you going to get it to market? And then looking at different ways that you can train your farmers, train the trainers. What kind of vessels are you going to get? What kind of long-term, low-interest deferred loan payment programs are out there to help Indigenous farmers? And so we realized that we had to be proactive rather than reactive, and start a Native Kelp Alliance that will be a 501c4 that can do a number of things, like figure out how to keep the kelp in the water longer so we can get more sequestration, how we can do actual carbon sinks and leave the kelp there forever. The other is how do we do programmatic permitting for restorative purposes and get 10 permits at a time instead of 1, because of the time and the money that it costs just to get 1. And then, there's everything from, how are you going to grow climate change resilient species for the future? So we're going to have our own laboratories. We're going to have to do our own research for final finished products and development of products. We want to figure out how we can build portable kelp nurseries like Tesia built in Seward with the Alutiiq Pride Marine Institute and the Chugach Regional Resources Commission. So Indigenous tribes who live in remote areas can, get one of these 40-foot containers and basically grow and cultivate and deploy their own seed from their village sites.
Yeah. So let's dive into some of these programs that you gave that awesome overview for. One here is dive training and some of the workshops we were holding this year. So as Dune mentioned, we really believe in training the trainer. We're not positioning ourselves to be experts in the field or to be the one that everyone has to lean on. What we really want to do is to share this knowledge with open arms, everything we've learned, all our failures and successes, so farmers can continue to share that knowledge and also own the information themselves. And we believe not in outsourcing, but insourcing, so training our team and investing in our people. And this is Logan here, who participated in this advanced scuba course we had this year, where he learned diving, species identification, sori collection, and scientific sampling. So on the top right is a picture of sugar kelp, and state of Alaska requires that all our farmed kelp have wild kelp parent stock. So every year we have to go out and find wild fertile kelp to use to propagate for our farms. So this is a sori patch, which is that dark spread you see, and that is collected and then sent to me at the nursery here, where we then induce an inoculation period and encourage those spores. So thousands of spores are released from that patch, and we encourage them to settle on these twine wrap spools. And then we keep it here in the nursery for 6 weeks before sending it to our farm and outplanting. So as Dune mentioned, this is our mobile kelp seed nursery, the first ever, which was Dune's innovative solution to address the seed sourcing bottleneck of the industry. So prior to this, there were only 2 kelp nurseries in Alaska, neither of which could support Prince William Sound farmers. We recognized early that this could be the pinch point that shuts out remote Native communities. In response to that, we built and deployed this mobile kelp seed nursery and laboratory that is completely self-sufficient, built in a 40-foot shipping container, and it can be deployed to any community so that they can own their own kelp seed production. And then after it's there for 6 weeks, it gets sent out to the farm. And that little twine is then unspooled over this grow line that you see in front of you. And then after 3 to 4 months, it becomes what you see here. So a point of pride, as you mentioned, is that Native Conservancy is the first to grow kelp in Prince William Sound. And in our first year, we grew 3 species at 7 locations, harvesting over 4,000 pounds. And this year, we're going to be tripling our production, including adding a commercial site. So this first year, they were all test sites. And the point of a test site is to evaluate the nutrient capacity of a region and determine if there is enough nutrient exchange to support a commercial site. In addition to that, we also use these sites to test species-specific array designs and also refine our processes for deploying, outplanting, and harvesting. And after this 1 year alone, or 1.5 years of growing kelp, we are much more confident in advising future farmers not only how to get in the water, but most importantly, where. And our focus now is processing, value adding, and marketing, ensuring that there are reliable buyers in addition to subsistence production, and also really aiming to ensure that the profits stay local, that we're not just creating a lot of kelp and it's sold really cheaply to then be value added somewhere else, but we have a full processing line right in our communities. And as Dune mentioned, restoration is at the forefront of our mission. So we also center these end state solutions. We're really looking at the environmental value of products we create, such as fertilizer. So in addition to taking carbon out of the water, we can then put it into soil, or animal feed, which there's some early studies that show animal feed for pig with seaweed fed to pigs can reduce methane output. So looking at the whole supply chain to make sure that it's really regenerative at every stage.
Yeah. And this slide is about the Teya Alliance, which is kelp. Teya is salmon, and the Teya Cooperative for developing Indigenous Mariculture and Fisheries. And so what we realize that is happening right now is this kelp and mariculture movement across not only Alaska, but America and around the world is actually a modern day land claims on the ocean, where Indigenous peoples are going to be displaced and disenfranchised if they don't figure out how to organize and align their efforts in order to preserve their inherent rights. And what I see is that we have to not only be on the offense by going out there and getting kelp permits and getting kelp in the water, but we're going to have to be on the defense and also figure out how we can, like what Canada is doing, try and get a reconciliation of fishing rights, or in this case, get a new act for mariculture and aquaculture that actually respects the inherent rights of Indigenous peoples and their access to their lands. So what we're hoping is that we'll have cultural easements or community development quotas that allow Indigenous peoples to have the first right of refusal to choose the land in front of their villages, or at least give the blessing that it's okay for industry to roll them. But what my hope is that the Indigenous communities are going to come together and realize that by starting a Native Kelp Alliance and a Native Kelp Cooperative, that they can create a destiny in a future that they can be proud of and do their part for doing something good for the ocean and the planet as well, including the people.
Mm-hmm. So in the next few slides, I would like to introduce some of the research we are participating in. We added a research component to our work last year to ensure that not only do communities own and direct the data derived from their farms, but that the work forwards our collective mission for restoration, sovereignty, and regenerative economy. This is right after harvest of sugar kelp at one of our test sites, and we're inspecting it for quality and biofouling. So the first that we're looking at, as Dune mentioned earlier, is carbon removal and sequestration capacity. So the research is still in the early stages, and what we're participating in forwarding is quantifying carbon uptake by species and developmental stage, as well as looking at those end state solutions. So we really want to understand how much carbon is being uptaken by a farm. In addition to that, we're looking at, so kelp degrades from the tip to the stipe, and that degradation will then sink to the seafloor and have a sequestration value there as well. So we're looking at that as well. And then also trying to forward some of the deep sea sinks and sequestration activities that are happening that are very exciting and innovative. But like Dune mentioned with the alliances, we will need some policy changes to allow for that to happen on a larger scale, and at a scale we would like it to happen.
And you're right that those bulbs on the bull kelp are at the top.
They are, yes, that's right. In addition to that, we are looking at or forwarding research regarding ocean acidification in kelp. Twofold. One is looking at OA's impact on kelp, especially at its early developmental stages, so we can get an idea of what's coming and the future impacts that we'll be seeing on these wild kelp beds. And then the second, even more exciting, is the capacity of kelp farms to potentially mitigate OA regionally. And so that work is being done in partnership with the Lutic Pride Marine Institute in Seward, as well as other science partners. And we are also looking at habitat creation. So the herring used to be a huge industry. Dune, how big was the herring pounding industry in Prince William Sound before the spill?
Just the annual return of Pacific herring to Prince William Sound in 1988 and before was 200,000 ton a year. And after the Exxon spill, it dwindled down to as low as 4,000 ton. And last year, 20,000 ton came home to spawn, which was great.
That's awesome. Yeah, but still not anywhere near pre-spill levels. And there hasn't been really active restoration work to try to encourage the herring to come back in greater numbers. So what we're really looking at are opportunities to place kelp arrays at historic spawning areas and see if we can encourage those populations to come back and spawn on our kelp. Many people say, oh, like that's a bad thing for your kelp because then you can't use it for food or other things. But for us and our mission, that would be the greatest thing ever if we could see herring spawn on our kelp and support the recovery of the herring population in Prince William Sound. This will also take changes in policy to be able to do, which we're hoping our Teya Alliance can tackle. And then finally, on the research side of things is looking at restoration. Kelp beds are being decimated around the world and the lower coastline here in the Pacific. And while we haven't seen the level of urchin barrens or predation or other issues yet here in Alaska, it is starting. And the writing is only on the wall. I mean, we see what's happened in California with the wild kelp forests. So we really want to get ahead of this and participate in the science and research to understand how to participate in restoration efforts sustainably, to make sure that there is enough genetic diversity in restoration efforts, and to understand what would be the best thing for restoring a forest with a long-term vision in mind. So we need continued research here, we need policy changes, And a huge thing we need is active monitoring, so we know when the kelp forests are starting to be hit. And Dune, you have a great quote you'd like to share here as well, right?
Yeah, a dear friend of ours, well, I got a couple of quotes. One is from Michael Bezanson, who he started the organic food program for Whole Foods USA. And he said to us, he goes, if it's not regenerative, just don't do it. And that's absolutely true and necessary. And Michael Barber, who's another dear friend of ours, who is the executive director of the Alaska Conservation Foundation, he said, Dune, what you are doing by creating this regenerative economy through kelp is creating an industry that is based on restoration, conservation, and mitigation, unlike development of natural resources like Alaska's entire history has been based on. So to me, this is one of those 1,000 opportunities of regenerative solutions that we all need to be getting behind and supporting, because, you know, a lot of people, you know, they want to change the world. Well, be the change that you want to see happen in the world. And that's by taking action and just being not only an activist, but getting out and being active in the wild and doing your part to save what's left while we can, while it still matters.
Mm. Yeah, we've it's amazing how much we've accomplished in just these last 2 years, and it makes me believe anything is possible. That we can really achieve the dreams we have laid out ahead of us. My dream is really for this to be a huge, vibrant industry, economic industry, definitely, but one that follows the leadership and centers Native communities and focuses on restoration, sovereignty, subsistence, and regenerative economy in that order. I would love to turn the tables on what an economic industry means or could look like, and I really think that kelp is the place to do it. Kelp does nothing but give. It gives to the ocean, it gives to us, and I think it's an absolute privilege to work with kelp and to work with Dune at the Native Conservancy doing this work.
Yeah, and I would just like to end this with, you know, it is going to take a lot of hard work, and you have to dream big in order to really create the change that we need to see happen for our planet, because things don't look good out there, folks. I've been traveling around the world, and I've been seeing what's happening. You see a lot of it on the news, and so we have to be a part of the future. We have to be a part of solutions that make sense for the ocean, for the air, for the land, and for the people. And I know on a personal level, growing up in Prince William Sound, I remember when some of those 200,000 ton of herring would surface at nighttime, and they would gulp in the fresh air in the moonlight, and they literally looked like silver dollars on top of the water surface. And to imagine that they were gulping oil and dying at you know, rates that would harm the run for the last 32 years. What a lot of people don't understand is that the herring was half of our annual income for that 1 month of April. And so if we can figure out how to grow these kelp farms and convince the herring to spawn on them, where they're spawning in cooler, colder, cleaner waters rather than in the intertidal zone where there's still oil seepage, what's going to happen is we'll have a better herring spawn, and hopefully they'll rid themselves of this disease, and then they'll recover. Because if the herring recover, the 27 most heavily impacted species from the Exxon Valdez oil spill will also recover, and therefore we'll live happily ever after. And so we're thrilled to be a part of your conference, and you know, we want to encourage co-opetition in this industry. And because the more that we can carpet the ocean with kelp, the better chance we have for the land and the air and the water to restore itself. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you both. That was definitely inspiring. The old tagline for the institute that we're at was "Be the Solution," and I always loved it. And they changed it, but I thought that was the right one, and it's kind of definitely aligned with your wisdom there. You know, I had a real quick question before maybe we open it up. I was really interested in what you were saying, Dune, about the tension between kind of the commercialization of kind of aquaculture and kelp and indigenous rights, and how, you know, that you're really making the point that the indigenous groups really have to be forward looking to claim their rights. And I wanted to understand better the tension between some of the commercial interests and the indigenous rights for these resources. If you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Sure. As a commercial fisherman, we've been owned by the seafood mafia, or the bigs, as we call them, the processors, the canneries, the hatcheries, for about 150 years. And what we see in kelp and mariculture is that it has the opportunity to help restore the ocean, at least create the habitat for all the different species that make a living in the kelp. But what will happen is it'll also relocalize lost fishing jobs in the communities and bring our women and children back home, and the men will follow. And what'll happen is we'll be able to build regenerative, sustainable economies based on thousands of years of history right in our backyards. And so I feel it's important that indigenous peoples have the opportunity to permit, because right now we have the bigs going after mega farms, 1,000-acre farms. And do you think that they're going to give half of those revenues to the native peoples? What we're going to be lucky is we're going to be lucky to get jobs to plant their kelp, to harvest their kelp, to process their kelp. We're certainly not going to be owners or people that are figuring out how to create finished products out in the marketplace. So what we're hoping is that, you know, industry and government will recognize indigenous people's intrinsic ties to the land, and respect and honor that, and let us be the original, like we were the original guardians and stewards of the land. Let us be that again to help restore the ocean, which will also restore the land and the air.
Great. Well, you know, as you kind of are moving forward with that, you know, that work, please keep us abreast of it. We'd love to support that, and you know, and because I think that's absolutely the way to go.
Oh, yeah.
So thank you for that.
Advocates for you. We would love to be advocates and mobilize our community on anything like that we can help with.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I think with that, we'll open it up. I see, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name, Chiara, and please.
Yeah, I was out visiting a good friend's in Cake and Kikwan the other weekend. One of the elders was talking about water, just about Angsa and Anilka, and here in Southeast, just water rights and water access. And kind of on the same note as Jason, I guess I'm just curious about, you know, in the Salish Sea, I was really interested in doing kelp projects. I had a friend, Patsy Doherty, she's from Macau. She's an incredible woman who's super passionate about the possibility for seaweed and sovereignty to kind of go together. And one of the big problems we ran into was usual and accustomed territories, and the way that UNAs and fishermen kind of territories would overlap with where the seaweed is. And it seems like in Alaska, it's almost like a win-win, like rather than that territorialness or those issues that come with this vision down there, it seems like up here, it could actually really help establish or reestablish right and title to waterways. And I guess I'm just curious about, you know, it's so cool following, you know, the herring protectors and the work happening to protect herring in Sitka. It seems like There's so much dialogue too about sovereignty there and how herring are so linked to sovereignty. Anyways, I guess I'm rambling a little bit, but I guess my question, it's all so connected and so beautiful. But I guess my question is, can you speak a little bit more to that jurisdictional piece and how kelp specifically could help with some of these jurisdictional pieces and in terms of tribal management of waterways?
Sure. A good example is when Biden, in his first week of office, signed the 30 by 30 law into place. Well, a lot of folks in Alaska believe that since 35% of the lands are federally protected under ANILCA, therefore there should be a no more clause, no more protection of federal protections of land. And certainly the native corporations who own 44 million acres of the state, they don't want to see one single acre permanently protected from unsustainable development. And so when you think about what mariculture and especially kelp can do for ocean farming, is by this being a modern day land claims, any tribe that is unrecognized or fighting for their inherent rights or even right of existence, when they make a application and they get a farm, then it'll lead to tribal recognition, it'll lead to a land claims, and it'll lead to building a regenerative and sustainable economy that makes sense for these times. And so my feeling is that if tribes, not only in Alaska, but in America and around the world, work together, that industry won't be the ones that are greenwashing everything, saying that they're the new protectors and they're the ones that are helping save the ocean, because they're the ones who helped get us into this situation. And the native peoples are the ones who, they're just trying to be good stewards, and they've never been able to get any piece of the pie on any level for any sustainable economy. And I believe that if anyone should be helping restore, conserve, or do their part to create regenerative economies, it should be the native peoples on their ancestral homelands. And I think that there's going to be tribes stepping up all over the world that are going to realize that they're going to have to look at these different regenerative solutions and be part of them if they're really going to make a difference for our planet and for all the people who want to live on the planet.
Great. Well, thank you for that. Let's move on here to Luba. You're up next.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation. So wonderful to see these threads coming together. And just a quick comment, I'm actually in Australia right now, and this issue of actually giving it's not exactly title, but rights to develop to Aboriginal groups is something that has been experimented with here at Uluru, Ayers Rock, and I think there are models. I don't know if they've been tried in the US, but my question to you was on the business side. I was interested, you're doing all this R&D, which is how businesses start, social ventures. You're talking about commercialization, and that's such a huge step. And I'm just wondering what your initial thoughts are about the business model. How will the revenue be generated? Who's going to grow it? Do you see a franchise model? Do you see yourselves as aggregators and providing services? There are again lots of models around the world of starting small and building, and I'm just really curious how you're beginning to think about that commercialization process.
Sure. And that's a really good question, and thank you for that. One of the things that we're finding is that we want to form this native kelp cooperative, because what it does is it reminds me of we have these direct marketers who have sold salmon direct to market. And out of the 540 gill netters in our fleet, about 50 of us or so over the years have direct marketed our fish in some manner, some form or manner. And what that means is that when we harvest the fish at sea, we try not to let it hit the ground and bounce all over the steel deck or the aluminum deck or the fiberglass deck and bruise themselves. We put it right into a bleed tank and rake their gills and let them swim around till they perish. And so what happens is there's no stress, they're happy, they're swimming around. And then we take them out of the bleed tank and put them into seawater with ice, which we call a champagne system. And it brings their temperature down to like 33, 34 degrees. And we keep it at that until we deliver that fish. So it's in the highest possible quality form it probably can be. And then we head and gut that fish, and then we turn around and we compete against the same fishermen that are doing the same thing. And so it becomes a race to the bottom because we're fighting for the same marketplace. Where if we had an association or an alliance or a cooperative where everyone was working together, then we'd agree on the baseline of this is what, in the case of fish, the headed and gutted price would be. And if you want to fillet, smoke, pickle, strip, put it in package form in portion size, and then use Denba wave energy freezing technology and absolutely drive that fish to the highest quality, you'll be able to get more money and knock yourself out. But as long as you have a cooperative and some sort of an association and you agree on the bottom line, then you're going to have a healthy competition and not directly competing against each other, because that's what's going to happen. If everyone is growing kelp around the world, which they are, then real soon here, they're going to be running into market problems. One of the things we'd like to see happen too is we want to see an indigenous brand. We want to figure out how, because they're not principles, but our premiums are a little different. Like if you buy the kelp from us, what you're doing is you're buying into a new way to live on the planet. It's not just buying a better product or a tastier product or a healthier product or something that was, grown by an indigenous person. By buying our kelp from us, you're going to be actually helping conserve and restore and preserve what's left. So those premiums come at a much higher value than the cost of competing against each other for the same kelp product out on the marketplace.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I look forward to seeing where we can buy some of your kelp products down in the lower 48 when it's available. So other people here, feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, put your question in the chat. We have about 5-7 minutes left here.
And I know you're dying to ask Tesia a question.
I was wondering if you could elaborate more on your restoration projects, and specifically any work that you're doing. I don't know how, well, I guess you said there were some issues with like increasing water temperature in Alaska with kelp, but anything to kind of help the kelp be more resilient, that'd be great.
Yeah, do you want to take that one, Tesia, and I'll add some?
Yeah, that sounds great. So we're in the really early stages, and one of the things we're restricted by is Alaska state policy, which doesn't allow for restoration, active restoration right now. So we're focusing, we're going to be turning to that momentarily, but in the data and the research